to Gourmet Brewing. I'm your host, Doug Piper, and I wanted you to know how much I appreciate your allowing me to join you in growing our beverage skills together. I'm a certified Cicerone and a certified BJCP mead and beer judge. And these webinars are my way of sharing my beverage journeys with you. I want you to know I am concerned about the crisis that has gripped our entire world at this time. But I think it's also important to forge ahead despite our fears and uncertainties. And just like Charlie Papazian's motto, relax, don't worry, have a home brew. I think these live streams allow us all to reconnect and enjoy a shared experience. We can return to reality soon enough. So, speaking of those journeys, we've had a lot of fun with run recently with Brian Kenny on minimalist brewing. He's brewing small batches, a gallon, gallon and a half in an RV. So he's got really can prove, and it's a great webinar to learn how to brew small batching. Peter Simons on various fermentation controllers. And this is just some neat devices that are actually do-it-yourself. Sierra Nevada's Terrence Sullivan talked about their barrel age program, and that was a lot of fun. Travis Rupp on historical beers. He's with Avery Brewing and talked about their Ales of Antiquity series. Richard Priest had a huge crowd for our Kveik yeast webinar. And Kruve, which was on brewing coffee. And as a beer judge, I've found learning to brew coffee really right helps you be a better beer judge. So if you've missed any of these, I'd encourage you to check them out along with the other previous programs by clicking the follow button that I think's up there in the upper right corner of your screen. I believe it might even be green. I'll also share a link in the follow-up email after the live event. So our next live stream will be with Lars Garsel. And Lars has a huge crowd assembling. Looks like we've got 500 or 600 people waiting to hear this phenomenal webinar on yeast. So I'd encourage you to sign up. And I am going to do my best there to put a copy of it there in the chat. Let's see if I can do that successfully. One thing that's challenging, this is kind of a one-man show. So when I click too many buttons or have to click too many, it kind of slows down the process. So I want you to see the rest of my friends today. Today we're joined by Lindsay Barr. And Lindsay has a decade of experience working as a sensory specialist for New Belgium. She was also the co-founder and CSO of DraughtLab sensory software. She holds a master's degree in food science and technology from UC Davis and served as the chair of the ASBC Sensory Committee for 5 years, where she developed and published 7 beer sensory methods. She believes flavor is the most important factor in determining food and beverage quality, and has set her sights on continuing to develop tools focused on helping businesses use their senses to inform everyday production decisions. So now you know why Lindsay's on the show today. Now I'm also proud to present Christian Holbrook. Christian is the brewmaster at New Belgium Brewing and studied at the Siebel Institute and Doman's Academy. And I will remain eternally thankful for Chris, because a few years ago, he helped me with my home brewing challenge of New Belgium's 1554. My wife and I attended the grand opening of New Belgium's beautiful Asheville, North Carolina facility. And when we were there, my wife loved it. She didn't particularly like my home brews up until that point. And Chris shared to me a few points that helped me. And to this day, it's her favorite homebrew, along with most of my friends and family. So I have Chris to thank that. So welcome, Lindsay and Chris, to Gourmet Brewing.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it. The internet is challenged, so hopefully it will keep going smoothly. But I don't see any negative comments there in the chat, so hopefully everybody's video and audio is going well. So Lindsay, how about briefly summarizing what everybody can expect to hear about on growing our skills through technology? Now, before you say it, I've used Untapped. Is that the same sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for those of you who have been following the life of DraughtLab, we've existed as a company for about 4 years. Our first kind of foray into the sensory software world was through our software called DraughtLab. That was built for quality control, primarily research and development as well, really intended for the professional brewing world. And that's seen success in the professional brewing world. And what we really wanted to do with the app that we're going to play around with today called SampleOx is have something that kind of rounds out the story with product development and quality control and do some more of the front end consumer research stuff. So the SampleOx is really intended to help consumers, judges, professionals even develop their palate, get a better understanding of how they are as a taster, give them the tools to be able to develop themselves a little further, while also really interacting and having an impact with breweries in a meaningful way to help guide product development from the very beginning stages of any kind of beer's birth. So as far as how similar it is to Untapped or any of the other kind of consumer tools that exist, what makes SampleOx different from those is, like I said, it kind of came out of the professional tool. So the lexicons that are integrated into the back end are all what the professional brewers are using at many of the breweries across the country, across the world actually. And it's using a lot of the same techniques that we've developed over time and that I've known back from like my academic days at UC Davis and working through New Belgium as well. Integrating them and making them accessible for people who have little to no training, but also being flexible enough to where you can actually develop your own skills and also give important and interesting feedback back to breweries rather than kind of a 5-point scale and a comment box. Breweries will actually be able to have a little bit more analytics that will help develop products that are specifically intended for the consumers that are doing the product development on the SampleOx side, if that answers your question.
I think it does. And I can't wait to get into more details. It looks like Josh Lindsay says we really enjoy using DraughtLab Pro for our QA and daily sensory program. So you got a fan out there, Lindsay,
nice.
At least one.
Thanks, Josh. So yeah, Josh, I mean, you're going to see that there are a lot of similarities between DraughtLab and SampleOx. We're integrating the tools that we've been developing and using and finding a lot of success in the professional brewing industry for the last 4 years, and making that fun and accessible for consumers so that they can kind of develop and hone in their own skills while building relationships with breweries.
Well, great. We're going to return back to the main program in just a moment. But I just want to give, a couple of logistical items right quick. First of all, if the webinar is not playing correctly, refreshing your browser window, it's amazing what it can do for you. Also, if you're having trouble, you can actually reduce the bandwidth of your program. I believe it's in the bottom right-hand corner. There's a little gear symbol, and you can choose a lower resolution version, and that might make things work a little bit more smoothly for you. One of the best things about this platform is, though, you can ask a question. So right there in the dead center of the screen, click on the Ask a Question. It looks like there are 4 there already. You don't have to be there live if you need to run for your question to be answered. And everybody that asks a question gets a unique email with a link to where your question was answered in the program. So you don't even have to search for it. You don't even have to watch the whole video. So I find that really convenient, and we've got two real experts on today. So you can also direct your question if you want to direct it to Christian, on something at New Belgium, or if you want to direct it directly to Lindsay that might be more sensory oriented. So I would encourage you, if you have a preference for who's going to answer the question, to please put it there. Now, we also have some Facebook groups to kind of continue and share the journey as we go through this. I'm going to copy and paste some links over there, hopefully successfully. And there we go. If you click on any one of those links, the ones I think you can kind of read and see which ones. For those of you unfamiliar with those, the Gourmet Group is the gourmet brewing page where we kind of cover everything on fine brewing beverages. BJCP 101 is an entry-level BJCP course where there are people just working together to help people advance in the BJCP. The BJCP 201 is obviously those that have gotten a little further ahead. They've gotten maybe their first level with the BJCP. Then we have a BJCP Meat and Cider group. And those groups are really just in the early stages of forming, but it's a great group. Everybody's trying to help each other grow on their journeys with, particularly in those, the BJCP areas. These webinars are part of a series of webinars that I'm creating to help AHA and BJCP study groups that I'm a part of. If you're not a member yet and are interested in exploring or pursuing your journeys, I would highly recommend that you look into those groups. I also wanted to mention these are supported through my Patreon as folks, and this is all crowdfunded, and these Patreon members really help keep this going. So I would encourage you, if you like the webinars, know they're crowdfunded. I certainly appreciate your support. And also, there is a super easy way. AHA is a wonderful thing to belong to, and if you click on my link, it gives a little bit to support these webinars, and you get your AHA membership, and it doesn't cost you a bit more. It's the same as everywhere. So we're going to move through these, and just know that everybody that registered will get an email with a link to the recording, slides, and links to the previous webinars. So if I'm clicking all the buttons right, I'm going to bring our guest back on screen, and we're going to jump right into our program with Lindsay and Christian, New Tech to Improve Tasting Skills. So Lindsay, you want to lead off with this discussion?
Yeah, sure. So when Doug and I were having this conversation a few days ago, he really he asked me to talk a little bit about how one can develop their palate and train themselves to just kind of hone in on their sensory skills. I'm also a beer judge with GABF and the WBC and have been for a few years, and I understand that it's a totally different beast, really. It's a lot of the skills are transferable, but when you kind of get into that really rigid mindset of what you're doing in the evaluation world, when you're judging, it can be kind of difficult to kind of like cross over into like the quality control and the consumer research area. And what's really great about judges is that you're already really used to evaluating beers in a really objective manner. It's what I've found is most difficult is trying to get panelists to kind of change their mindset from speaking about flavor in a solely subjective manner to being a little bit more objective. And I'm sure Chris can agree with me there. I've shaken panelists to try to get them to be more objective in their evaluations, but what you're doing as judges is you're starting from a place that is just evaluating beer flavor for beer flavor in a really kind of straightforward manner, which I think is really incredible. So generally, as far as trying to hone in on your sensory skills and grow your lexicon, I think the first thing to kind of really focus on is just mindfully evaluating your products. You've seen sensory booth settings and you've seen these kind of whitewashed walls and these areas that are very sterile. And that is kind of typical for professional sensory departments because you're trying to get rid of all distractions and you're trying to just like hone in on what it is you are experiencing. But I think that you can do that really anywhere, especially if you have a tool that's going to bring you through your flavor evaluation and kind of start with the broad kind of flavor characteristics. So if you don't think that you're a great taster, I think the first thing that that one does is, you know, you kind of get in your head, but you can at least, everybody can at least kind of know what they like. They may not have an idea about why they like it, but they can start with kind of a broad term like fruity. I like it because it's a little bit fruity. And then if you can follow a order, following a lexicon down, it gets easier and easier to hone in on those sensory skills. So we'll go through that in a second and using the app. And if you guys haven't already downloaded the app, and if you do want to do a tasting, then go ahead and download it. We are tasting Fat Tire today, so I know a lot of you guys can't get it, which I'm sorry about that. It's very sad for you. But we'll at least go through it anyway, and you guys can mess around with it anyway. So if you do have Fat Tire in front of you, go ahead and open it up and put in the join code that we sent you earlier. I'll put it in the comments anyway. And I can just at least bring you through the app to give you an idea of what I mean by following
so call it out. I'm going to put it here on my phone.
Okay. It's 2HTT9.
All right.
Cool. And then if you go ahead and open it up, you can just go through it, Doug, and it's there you go.
All right.
All right, so you can see that you're just going to do your flavor evaluation, doing visual aroma. So if you click into aromas, I can show you what I was just talking about. So the lexicon kind of starts really broad. So most of us can determine that we're experiencing something fruity. So if you click on fruity, then you can kind of over time hone in on what it is you're experiencing. So fruity, okay, now that I see the word citrusy, that's what it is. It's citrusy, so clicking on citrusy. And then, okay, maybe you might say it's grapefruit or lemon or orange. So starting with that lexicon is a really nice way of just kind of developing your lexicon over time. All right, so that's kind of the aroma. So one of the important things that I wanted to note in this is you guys know because you're beer judges, but aroma in this case refers to both orthonasal and retronasal olfaction. So stick with me here. We smell in two different ways. We smell by bringing chemicals into our nose that are volatile in the beer, bringing it out, and we're smelling it. That's what we would typically call aroma, but that's just orthonasal olfaction. The second way that you smell is actually by heating up the beer on your palate and letting more of those aromas volatilize and interact with your palate, and then breathing back through your nose so that you can experience those aromas yet again. So if you just take a quick sip, let it warm up, and breathe out of your nose, that's also aroma. So taste in the app, and as science tells us, there are only 5 generally recognized tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. There are some other candidate tastes like metallic and fatty as well. And so taste in this case is just going to be strictly those basic tastes that are recognized in the sensory science world. So if you scroll down, you can see what that looks like. And then you're just given the ability to rate on a scale from low, medium, and high on the intensities of all of those tastes. Mouthfeel.
So you want to, so how would we do it? Do you want to kind of suggest?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Well, you're drinking it. I'm not yet.
Oh, you want me to do this?
Yeah, I'll take dictation.
Well, I don't want to bias you guys because I also want you guys to go ahead and do it. So I'll give you a minute to do it yourself too. I'll just go through the app, but low, medium, high, and high sweetness and mouthfeel. So mouthfeel, I'm going to go over that. Once I give you a little while to go ahead and taste it, then I'll actually give you my tasting notes, and I would love to hear what Chris has to say about it as well. So mouthfeel, there are a couple of different mouthfeels that I want to point out. So body, so the body of beer is going to be just its general kind of thickness, its weight. So if you think about a like an American light lager or something like that, that's going to be really thin, light-bodied beer. Think about the force that it takes to push your tongue through the matrix, and the more force that it takes, the higher body the beer is. So like a really chewy kind of stout is going to be kind of a high body beer. Carbonation, we know what carbonation is. It's that tingling sensation from CO2, anywhere from low, medium to high. High would be like a Saison or something that's like bottle conditioned. A low carbonated beer would be something that's been sitting out for a little while. Alcohol, what we mean by this is that kind of boozy heat. So if you think about a imperial stout, it's going to be really hot on your palate and kind of like hot in your chest. That's going to be a highly alcoholic hot beer. And then drying. So drying is going to be that astringency. So when you take a sip of beer and you kind of suck on your tongue a little bit and you get that sandpapery sensation, that's a highly astringent or really drying beer. That's produced intentionally because we want you to be able to take another sip of beer. That's an intentional thing. And a lot of those chemicals are either both hop derived and malt derived. So drying is not necessarily a bad thing. And then spice. When we talk about spice, we are actually talking about like capsaicin spice, like that chemogenic sensation that is elicited with like a spicy beer or spicy food. So spice is going to be anywhere from low to hot. If it's unrated, it just means that there's nothing in there. All right, I went ahead and I skipped over visual. So if you wouldn't mind going back up to visual, I'll just go through that. Just scroll up to the top.
Force me to discard changes.
Just say save. You can say discard changes. We can redo it.
Okay.
Yeah, and then go ahead and open it, and go back up to visual, and then you can see that the color gradient that you just had, Doug. Yep. Color gradient is by SRM. So if you just like hold your beer up to your app, you can get a good color, and then the only other visual quality that we are looking for is haze. So anywhere from light to moderate to heavy haze. So that's your full sensory evaluation, kind of like the guiding through your full sensory evaluation with the app. And if you guys have Fat Tire, I would just go ahead and give it a minute. Maybe while Chris talks about the history.
All right, Chris, 1 second and you're up.
All right.
Okay. You gonna need the I'm gonna take the app down if you don't mind, Lindsay. You don't need it at the moment, right?
No.
Chris, is all yours.
Yeah, great. Good to be here. Thanks everybody for joining us. I think, in terms of the history of Fat Tire, maybe a fun fact is my first Fat Tire was in 1998 in the parking lot of Alpine Valley Music Theater in southern Wisconsin. So anybody that's familiar with Alpine Valley can form their own stories from there. But in terms of my experience with Fat Tire, I mean, it has been our flagship beer for a long time, and our portfolio has changed quite a bit, and it's still near and dear to myself and a lot of other coworkers at New Belgium for sure. So we make sure to take good care of it. Looking back on the history a little bit, referencing Jeff Liebish's own words on Fat Tire is that, he took a lot of inspiration from British bitters in the mid 80s during his travels to Europe and the UK, which was really interesting. I think internally at New Belgium, there's a story that, Fat Tire is very similar or modeled after some of the Belgian or Dutch amber ales such as DeConnick or Palm. So it's, certainly good context to have, I guess, to know that, Jeff was framing Fat Tire after, classic English bitters, which looking at the recipe is not surprising. So there's Goldings hops in Fat Tire and Willamette hops. And it is, while it's not an assertive beer, there's quite a lot going on. So to kind of walk through a tasting after following Lindsay's direction, or how I would taste beer at the brewery. Looking at the beer, it's a nice sort of soft, true amber color, I would say, in a, thicker glass. It takes on a really nice sort of ruby amber hue or characteristic, and something that, we've done recently is, started to bottle condition, add live yeast to cans and bottles of Fat Tire at the time of packaging. And so if you're drinking out of a can or a bottle, it's not going to be, crystal clear or brilliantly clear amber ale. There might be just a touch of haze, a very, very slight haze appearance to the beer. So, in terms of aroma, I like to rouse it quite a bit. We do carbonate Fat Tire to 2.7 volume CO2, not 2.5. So it should be a little more lively, a little bit more CO2 to drive those aromas out of the glass. And I think the first thing that I grab with Fat Tire is the ester profile. So ethyl hexanoate, so kind of that, apple, black licorice, black jelly bean characteristic coming forward. Ethyl acetate, so a little bit more of that green apple, slightly fruity characteristic coming forward, even a hint of isoamyl acetate, so even, hints of banana mixed in. But, with the hop profile, the hop varieties that we're using in Willamette and Golding, there is, some citrus mixed in with that. And when you couple that with the sweeter ester profile, the caramel malt that we use, that kind of turns into, at least for me anyway, turns into a little bit of orange marmalade. And then on the taste, there should be a nice balanced bitterness to go with some of that malty sweetness, right? And that bitterness should come through in a slightly, certainly not assertive, and a slightly, resinous, again, balancing sort of impact. So I find this to be an incredibly sessionable beer. I think I mentioned on the chat already that I do have a keg of Fat Tire at my house currently. So feeling quite lucky in that regard, especially these days. So yeah, it's my 2 cents worth.
So what would you rate the bitterness?
I would rate it low.
Yeah. And how would you do the body?
Personally, I think it's a medium body, but it drinks a little bit lighter than that, and that's,
yeah, it really does.
We've really taken care to, without getting too deep here, taking care to really, revisit the water chemistry, the salt addition profile, pH, stuff that really, has a tendency to set a beer apart over the last couple of years. And, I think it's kind of cool to mention that while consistency is certainly important, day to day, week to week, we want to make sure that we're producing the best Fat Tire and the best beer that we can all the time.
Wow. We
Yeah,
got some
so
good
what-
participation.
Yeah, so we got a great participation. So what Doug's showing right now is the results page. So once you've evaluated the beer, you can go over into results. And then what we did is we set verified attributes that Christian and the qualified sensory panel at New Belgium put together. And basically whoever gets closest to, you will get points that are consistent with how close you were to the evaluation of the professional. So you can see that whoever just won this thing at 1,933 points should log in so that we can see who you are, because there are a lot of anonymous folks right there. You can log in and make you can register your name on the bottom right with those 3 little toggle buttons. I didn't do so bad, but somebody beat me. And Josh Lindsay, my buddy over there in 3rd place. That's great. And Chris, you didn't do that well. No, it's So yeah, so this is kind of one of the ways that you can kind of test your palate and have this kind of community being born around the being around tasting. Sorry. So we all did the tasting together, and we can see how we all did. The palate score is calculated with three different factors that kind of go into it. The first factor is just how accurate were you. So of the verified attributes that the professional set, how many of those attributes did you select and get correct? So you'll get points for that. The second one is how precise were you? So instead of just putting in a whole bunch of aroma attributes and just kind of doing the shotgun approach, if you will get points based on how accurate you were within yourself. So of those attributes that you selected, how many of those were correct? You'll get points based on that. And then the third piece is going to be the complexity. So for a highly complex beer, there are more points on the table to get. And for a less complex beer, there are less points. So we got one of the questions in the question box that I just noticed. That was basically around, how do I know when I'm improving my palate over time? Your palate score will change over time. It will develop and it will grow over time. And as you continue to do evaluations and use the app, you'll get a better understanding of kind of your coverage. How many different samples have you tasted before? What of those samples, what did you like and what did you dislike? We actually didn't do a hedonic test on this one, but if there was a hedonic test associated with it, you would be able to get a history of what you have tasted before and what you liked. And
Actually,
then what
I put it in the poll.
What's that?
I put it in the poll since you didn't have it in there. I thought I would. Yeah, so we'll see. So according to the poll, in our group, 45% like it moderately.
All right.
And 32% like it very much. And the rest of them are pretty small categories. So as you can tell, so it's 78% either like it very much or moderately.
Yeah, that's pretty solid. Of course, you do have the brewmaster sitting in front of you, so you're not going to tell him that you don't like his beer.
All right, my crowd will, I'll tell you.
It's all right.
They don't hold back.
Okay, I believe it. That's a great distribution, just like a nice normal distribution with most people liking it, especially with like professionals. I think that it's hard to get people to say that they like anything extremely because you're picking it apart so much. So when we do the hedonic test paired with the description test, we lead with the hedonic test. And the reason why we lead with the hedonic test is just for that reason. If you get really into the nitty gritty of what you're tasting, and if you're in super evaluation mode, it will actually decrease how much you like the sample. There's like some pretty good research on that it actually modifies pretty dramatically what your actual hedonic perception is. So we always start with hedonics so that we can get that knee-jerk reaction. How much did you like it? And then you can get more into the nitty-gritty, what's actually in here. So this is really useful for breweries because breweries will get a better understanding of what are the attributes that drive liking, and on the flip side, what are some of the attributes that drive disliking, so that they can make recipe tweaks and modifications or guide product development based off of your feedback. And then, of course, it's really not that fun just to do surveys for survey's sake. So creating that competition and giving you the ability to increase your palate score over time is a fun way of just developing your skills and using technology to do that. That's what I have to say about that.
All right. Well, I'll tell you, this is one delicious beer, and I didn't know if Christopher wanted to dive in a little bit more after we've talked about it and picked apart his beer.
No, I was just going to add that, feel free to critique the beer. Take your liberties with it. I think, you're not going to offend me, and I'm open to any questions that folks have about Fat Tire or any of our other beers for that matter. But yeah, since we're talking about Fat Tire, I'm happy to take whatever questions people have and talk about whatever's on people's minds, I guess. If we're talking about, I think, Doug, you mentioned something earlier about, beer judging and, you know, style categories and in terms of like where Fat Tire fits. And, you know, mentioning the historical context around Fat Tire's development by, you know, one of our original co-founders, Jeff Liebisch, you know, English bitter, it's not too far off. We've found that according to GABF style guidelines anyway, it on paper anyway, in terms of a description, it lines up really well with Bière de Garde. I can't say that we found any success there at the GABF. I think we've entered Fat Tire in that category and get to the GABF and find that the winners all turn out to be more farmhouse style beers, conditioned with Brettanomyces or fermented with Brettanomyces. So it's definitely a departure from, you know, what Fat Tire is, obviously. So it remains a bit of a, you know, square peg, if you will, in terms of how it fits into a specific style.
So are there any particular stories or just some descriptors that you might use?
Around Fat Tire, man, I think, you know, when I started working at New Belgium, we made like so much Fat Tire, and we would filter. I started working in the cellar, so I was a shift brewer on the cold side of the process, and I can remember, you know, filtering Fat Tire. This was back in 2003, 2004, and we would filter Fat Tire for what seemed like days, for what I'm sure was days at a time, which was pretty fun. And so, you know, there's that bit of history. You know, there's interesting bits in, you know, talking to coworkers in production and brewing who have been there longer than myself. You know, in hearing about what it was like to make Fat Tire at 350 Linden, right at the old train depot up the street from the current brewery in Fort Collins, as well as what it was like, you know, moving the brewery and, you know, various recipes, obviously including Fat Tire, down the street to 500. You know, how continued growth and expansion, you know, impacted how we produce Fat Tire. For example, when, you know, our large brew house was built and commissioned in late 2002, early 2003, and we, you know, installed the Merlin work boiling system, you know, how the challenges that brought, and, you know, how that was perceived to have changed the beer a little bit, or the flavor quality outcome of the beer. So what's interesting though, through, you know, looking back throughout the years of New Belgium and brewing Fat Tire, is how consistent, and I'm being 100% honest here, how consistent the recipe is. You know, it's pale malt, it's Munich 10 Lovabond Munich malt, Caramel 80 from Briess Malting, Victory malt from Briess Malting, and Willamette and Golding's hops. And those, you know, I think the oldest brewing log that I've seen is from 1994 or 1995, and it's the same ingredients. So, you know, I think what's interesting is we've tried to make the same beer across many different, you know, production contexts and production, you know, equipment infrastructure wise. So of course there's a lot that's changed. There's I think a lot that has remained the same as well. And as I said earlier, we are constantly revisiting all of our recipes and, you know, making sure that we're keeping them fresh and relevant and staying true, you know, to the beer itself, and hopefully really good for everybody that's buying our beer and drinking our beer.
Christian, are there any descriptor words when you describe it, the color or the aroma that maybe we didn't touch on when we were using the app?
Yeah, I mean, I think grab another drink of beer here.
Of course, need a little inspiration.
I mean, I think there's a wonderful sort of floral citrus quality from the hops that we use, you know, that synergize really well, you know, with the ester profile. And so, you know, that's something that, we really try to push in Fat Tire through it with our fermentation practices and how we manage our yeast and, yeast nutrition is, making sure that ester profile, which I think really forms that backbone of Fat Tire's flavor quality and flavor profile, is that we're really staying true to that profile and pushing that upwards as much as possible. So again, I talked through some of that earlier, but yeah, some of that, black jelly bean, apple, maybe just a hint of banana, again, hints of floral and citrus from the hops that we're using. Really, I think, again, there's a lot going on here that's easy to glance over when you just kind of take the beer on its label, right? When you're like, it's just a Fat Tire. But we take great care to put, I'm obviously, proud of this beer, and we take great care to produce, the best beer that we can. And there's more than meets the eye, I guess is what I'll say. Don't judge a beer by its label. Maybe a better way to put that.
Well, Lindsay, I want you, now you're such a sensory expert. What words would you use to describe Fat Tire that are a little beyond what we touched on in the app?
Well, I did do my evaluation, as you saw. I'm also curious too to see what everybody else said. So if you do the overhead, overhead view, we can actually see what everybody else said. One of the words that we used to throw around a lot at New Belgium was biscuity, which we kind of didn't really so much in the later days. But I do think that there's like a real malt, like a pretty strong malt flavor. I think this is a beautiful expression of overall malt flavor. There's a lot of complexity to it, but it's like an easy drinker. So if you go back up and just kind of, you were actually
but wait a minute, we got a winner here.
Ashley, I know you, and you're rocking. Nicely done. Nice. I'm
We're getting our butts kicked.
Man.
Go, Ashley.
Ashley blew us away too, like 1900.
Yeah, look at this. 1933.
All right. I see you, girl. That's awesome.
Oh, and Chris did a great job, and Josh, and look at this. So those are these anonymous that are way up there. Gosh, how far down am I?
There you are, Doug. Nice. It's really cool to see all you guys doing it.
But there's some high scores here. We're laughing when we're looking at the top.
You guys are crushing it.
Yeah, there's some great scores here. We've got a really solid group here. So thank you for everybody that participated. Now, as a sampling number, Lindsay, so we're 44 people. Mm-hmm. So let's go back to our poll. And if we were a brewery and our hedonic testing came back that 80% liked it either very much or liked it moderately, and we had an input of 44 people. Is that a pretty good test result?
I think that's really great. My goal when running consumer research like this is to get at least 30 people. And we got in the 40s. I'm sure that standard deviation was relatively low. So one of the cool things about this is we can start to understand how enthusiastic you are about it if you do the hedonic score, but we can also understand what are the attributes that drive liking. So a lot of times brewers want, like we at New Belgium, we always wanted insight from consumers, and not just to tell us what was in the beer, but also to give language to talk about it. So you can see with those aromas, some of the attributes that were brought out there, like grapefruit. Quite a few of you guys said grapefruit. That's not something that was like in the normal description, but that might also be something valid and really interesting for a brewery to know. Consumers are very savvy, and this particular group of people are very, very savvy. So you can see those little green check marks indicate the attributes that are verified attributes. So that's, Christian and the New Belgium team said that this beer was low in bitterness and low in sweetness. And so it's a check and a check. So you guys are all on it there. So The red bars indicate the attributes that you selected, and the blue bars indicate the attributes that the remainder of the consumer selected. So everybody here really agreed that there was no sourness, that it was medium body, medium carbonation. There was a lot of agreement, at least on the tastes and the mouthfeel sections. In aroma, I think everybody noted that there were some kind of malt aromas and some kind of fruity aromas, but there wasn't too much agreement on that. But it looks like you guys are on it. I think going back to your original question too, I've always been a huge Fat Tire fan. It was one of the beers that kind of made me love beer. And I think how it's evolved, like it's not evolved majorly. It kind of is sticking to itself. But I think that it's become, at least to me, as my perception changes and my palate develops, it used to be a pretty aggressive craft beer, and now we see this as something that's just like a really easy drinker. As craft beer has developed into being really IPA heavy or really booze heavy, Fat Tire is something that is kind of a welcome reprieve from everything that's kind of a palate destroyer. So I've been kind of going back to it and have been embracing and loving the malt complexity and the characteristics that
Palate destroyer. Now that's a good descriptor. I like
I'm sure
that.
some craft brewery has come up with it.
I like that.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
Christian, that's a pretty good lacing.
Yeah, it's not bad. We're pretty happy with that. I think, I know I've kind of topped up my glass multiple times, but getting similar effect, I suppose, here. But yeah, I mean, again, it's an all malt formulation, all malt recipe. There's not a shortage of hops in this beer, despite, what may appear on the first impression. And so, yeah, I think, again, just attention to quality. I'm starting to sound like a sales pitch, I feel like, but yeah, all the right reasons why, this should set up really well and make for a really sessionable beer. I agree with Lindsay. I think I'm probably just getting old, and that I appreciate the lower ABV content, and the sessionability of the beer for sure.
Well, in our Kvike theme, Edward O'Neill asks, and it'd be interesting to get your thought on this, for a home brewing recipe, would any of the Kvike yeast work well? Not sure which homebrew yeast is recommended for Fat Tire.
I think, that's a really good question. I think, something that we did, and Lindsay will remember this, something that we did for our 25th anniversary, back in 2016, was we collaborated with 5 other friends, if you will, in the industry. And, that included Allagash and Avery and Rheingeist. But what we did was, in those collaborations, a New Belgium brewer partnered with those breweries. And what we did, ask those breweries to sort of create their version of Fat Tire, right? And so we kind of let other people take the reins on Fat Tire. And I think some of the beers that we made were super interesting. And so that's what that question reminds me of. And so, yeah, I definitely would encourage folks to, model a recipe, right, in terms of malts, hops, if you will, off of Fat Tire, and then use a different yeast, or use, multiple yeasts in a mixed fermentation. One of the beers that I think we did that was really interesting was, I believe this was the Allagash collaboration, was we made a really interesting Fat Tire after more of that beer de garde style, and then, bottle conditioned it with Brettanomyces. And, it was just a really fun series of collaborations. So, yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about home brewing and brewing on a super small scale, is the ability to just kind of, have carte blanche with whatever you're doing. So, yeah, try it out. I would love to hear how it turned out.
Do you know which particular strain might work?
Of Kvike?
Yeah.
I think the Voss we've had pretty fun experiences with in the pilot brewery. So I guess that's where my mind goes to first. But yeah.
Well, that's perfect. I got a packet of that right here.
Oh, cool.
You just happen to have that in your back pocket,
I know.
Doug.
Perfect.
I actually
That's not
do.
weird.
We did not practice this.
Well, in fairness, I'm preparing for our webinar tomorrow night, so I've been doing some brews, and we're going to do a taste test on those, and we're going to, Lindsay, use your app. So,
Oh, great.
no one else will be able to taste it, but it'll be fun, and we're also going to taste a Fuller's London Pride. So we'll see how we do with that. So.
Awesome.
We'll find out who will skunk us. And by the way, Lindsay, for those that put it in as anonymous, we'll come back to the summary. Tell them how they can fix theirs and take it from anonymous and put a name in there so we can see everybody's name.
Yeah, so all you have to do to become non-anonymous, to identify yourself, is just on the bottom right, at least for Android users. I'm not positive for Apple users, for iPhone users, but on the bottom right, you will have those 3 little dots, and then you can just go in there and you can edit your profile from there. You will get an email, and all you need to do is follow the link, and then you'll be able to set up your account. So all you'll have to do is put in your name, and that's it. Then you're set to go. And one of the things that I want to point out too, while Doug has that up, is one of your questions was, how do I know what I had tasted over time? If you go to that little ribbon in the bottom, middle.
Yeah.
Right.
Do I have to join this one? Okay.
Yeah. You can now see all of the beers that you've tasted in the past. And with your, you can actually go back and look at your tasting notes, and then you can see when you've done a hedonic test and you have liked it, you can see that little heart indicates the samples that you've liked. So you can see how you did on this one, the St. B's, how many attributes you rated, and what you got correct. Wow, you did a really good job on that one, Doug. Yeah.
I think you coached me.
I may have. Yeah, I may have. Yeah, so that little ribbon is going to be where you're going to get all of the history from what you've tasted before. This is the second week that we've launched this app. There was more of a question around how do I kind of make sure that my palate score is increasing over time. You will be able to get more of your history as far as palate score goes in that little blue ribbon, or in that little ribbon on the bottom. So keep checking back in as we continue to develop it.
Okay, and Lindsay, for those of us that look around, when I go back, if I can hit this the right buttons here. When I go to the main page before I enter in the join code, there's a bunch of other stuff going on here.
So many of those are events that have been happening or had happened in the past. So if you go all the way up to the top, you can see that hop source. So that's a Brewers Association event that has been going on for some time. So keeping that on the front page. Dandelion Chocolate, if you order some chocolate from those guys, they are doing some tastings as well. So a lot of these are doing tastings or have done tastings in the past. This definitely isn't the full compilation of the breweries that are currently running tastings, which is why the join code exists. Next week, there will be a search tab as well. So you'll be able to search for breweries in your area that are doing consumer research and that you can get involved with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And so if we look at our results before we jump into the next part of our program, I will try and find it. Remind me that join code again. Do you have that handy?
I do. It is 2HTTP.
No. Either
Did I say it wrong? Sorry, 2HTT9. I read it wrong.
I thought that was too much like
2HTT9. No, H.
Okay.
I'm sure this is fun for the viewers.
Okay. I really have only had a part of this beer.
Yeah. Doug's had a few fat tires.
That's right. Okay. So I need to go to results and go over one.
Yeah, so you can see what everybody else did. And so this is where like a lot of the education comes in. You can see what other people are saying about it. You can also see what verified attributes there were. And actually you can go back and retaste your beer and, continue to develop your palate score further as you continue to taste.
Okay. I don't think this has changed too much. So maybe our other anonymous folks have dropped off.
That's fine.
But well, cool. This was fun. And so with my background popping around, Lindsay, you might want to explain what that was. Several people ask where I am, and I don't know that I can tell you where I am.
Yeah, I made this decision really quickly. Yeah, Doug asked me to give me a bar that he needs to be standing in. So I actually gave him one of my favorite bars. It's in Washington, D.C. This place is called Rose's Luxury. I don't know if any of you guys have been here, but there are a lot of people on this call, so I'm sure one or two of you have been there. I've just always had really good times there. And actually at the Craft Brewers Conference back when it was in D.C., I met some of my best friends to this day at that bar. And so it's kind of a special place that's near and dear to the heart. And of course it's beautiful. So we wanted Doug to have a nice, pretty background.
Well, I think it was a lot of fun. So at this point, it is almost the top of the hour. We're going to transition to the questions. But first of all, I want to verify that you guys have time to deal with the questions. We have 22 there. So Lindsay, can you stay a little longer?
Absolutely.
Okay. And Christian?
Of course.
Awesome. Okay. So we're going to transition just a little bit. I know there's a lot of folks that only allow an hour. And if you need to jump off, please feel free to do so. This is recorded. You can catch the second part. You can actually go through the questions one at a time. So I appreciate those of you that have spent an hour with us. I hope you've had fun, and catch us tomorrow night when we're talking with Lars Garshol, and that will be a lot of fun on Kvike. Lars is a brilliant guy, and I assure you, you won't be disappointed with that program. So again, I thank you. I hope everyone stays well and stays healthy. So now we're going to transition to the questions, and we're going to rip through these, I hope. And so, but there's 22 questions there. So if you look and you see one that you want to ask, everybody gets one vote. So if you see one you want pushed to the top, we'll get to that one first. So we're going to go through the questions, and I will try and direct them to the right person. This one's pretty obvious. I think it comes from Stuart. And Stuart asks, Lindsay, can a homebrew club set up an event code in Sampleox for a tasting event without a brewery creating one?
Yeah, that's a good question, Stuart. Just email me for now. Like I said, this is a second week of our launch. That's something that is in development, just to be able to kind of do your own tastings on your own. But for now, breweries, being that it's a consumer research kind of platform, breweries are the ones who kind of set it up and get their verified attributes in there and run events specific to their pubs. But for now, I'm happy to set you up, and we'll make that happen so you guys can run some tasting events. You can email me at lindsay@DraughtLab.com, GHT, DRAUGHT, and LANDSAY.
And Lindsay, but we can use everybody can use your DraughtLab app also, can't they? Because I know I've done it for a malt steeping.
Yeah, so we have a few apps that are out there. The DraughtLab Describe Your Beer app is the free DraughtLab app that exists right now. That's kind of doing the description test. It was kind of to get breweries familiar with describing their beer and setting their targets for quality control evaluations. So you can certainly use that. The Sampleox app, as you can see, is a little bit more engaging. It kind of does more with consumer involvement and helps with product development. So the Sampleox app kind of serves a bit of a different purpose. So if you want to do that kind of engaging leaderboard type thing, I'm happy to set you up with an account for now. You can certainly mess around with the DraughtLab Describe Your Beer app, which is free and lets you do the description test. But but there's no kind of leaderboard or anything in that one.
Yeah, I know it works very good in a homebrew environment.
Yeah.
So great question, Stuart. Our next one, I think this one's for you also, Lindsay. This comes from Richard. And Richard says, can the app be used or adapted to evaluate for a homebrew contest? Oh, I love that question.
Yeah, that's also a really good question. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a way that we can, again, get you guys to set up with an account, and you can kind of pair the hedonic test with the description test and get a good idea of what is of highest quality within categories. You can set up different events, different panels with your different styles, and make assessments based on that, on whose beer is the best and what are the characteristics that drive that liking. So we can set that up too.
Excellent. All right. Looks like the next one is for you also, Lindsay. And I think you've sort of answered this, but just to keep it in the question flow, if I'm using the app for my own personal beverage journey, how can I review all my scores over time to look at improving my reviewing skills?
Yeah, it's a good question. So over time, you'll be able to see what attributes you are really good at detecting and which ones you may not be quite as sensitive to. You'll get a better idea of what your overall exposure is to different flavors and to different brands. Those are all analytics that we are, working on integrating into that kind of final little ribbon area right there. For now, you'll be able to have tasting notes on all of the beers that you've tasted, or chocolates or anything in there. You can see that there are different products that are actually in there with different lexicons that are specific to those industries that's tied to them. So you'll at least get a good understanding of what you've liked and what you've said about it in the app as it stands now. And as we continue to develop it, you're going to have a much better idea of how your palate score is increasing and where maybe the holes in your palate are, or where your sensitivities are as well. That's all going to come pretty quickly, I think.
Great. Mm-hmm. We are going to rip through these more. Let's see. This one comes from Ty. Chris, looks like you're up for this one. Doug and Chris, can you share that 1554 recipe you mentioned?
Yes, absolutely. Doug, if you're in a better position to share that directly, go right ahead.
It's pretty archaic, but I will be glad to, unless you think, have you guys not ever kludged one together?
But if it's working for you, I mean,
that's true.
It's another recipe that really, to be honest, it really hasn't changed. So it's a really complex malt bill. It's a really fun recipe. So yeah, if you're in a better position to share that than I am, please do.
I will be happy to do that.
Great.
As long as I have permission.
Of course. Thank you.
But you remember, it's all relative. You remember I said they liked it the best of all my home brews.
Right.
So consider that, Ty, before you try it. Bill has the next most popular question. Lindsay, this looks like this is yours. Can I use this app with just any beer at home, or do I have to be invited by a brewery that's made an account?
Yeah. So for now, it's basically just whatever brewery is running consumer research. So those are going to be the beers that will show up there. We are talking about and in the process of developing that kind of what's called like the single player mode, where you can just kind of do your own evaluation. So it's all kind of in the works right now. But for now, it's basically breweries that have an account and are intentionally running consumer research.
That was a really good question also, Bill. It looks like the next one's for you, Lindsay. Sorry, Chris. I mean, there's
no.
She's getting all the hard questions.
This is normal for me.
Okay. The next one comes from Henry. Henry always asks some zingers. Can you add to the lexicon under your login?
Can I add to so can I add different terms or something under the lexicon.
Yeah. Would you say palate killer? So if that was important to you.
Yeah, good call. That is not something that's in the app right now, though that is something that's in DraughtLab. So if you wanted to add something, you can just kind of make a note for your own. If there's like an aroma or something that you're experiencing and it's not in the lexicon, then you can actually throw that in there. That's not something that's in SampleX right now, but it's not off the table. That's something that can pretty easily be added. So thanks, Henry.
Okay. Well, we're ready to get palate killer in there.
Yeah.
Jim's got good question. It's very popular. What, if any, eating restrictions are on the professional tasting panels prior to testing? And Lindsay, I guess that one's yours. I don't know about Christian, your background on the tasting panels.
Chris is a great panelist. I've, running the sensory program for a few years. Like Chris has been there, was at New Belgium longer than I was, and he was always is a very good panelist. I mean, he is the brewmaster after all, so hopefully he's pretty good. So
is he always a good panelist?
He has his ups. Chris is very
yeah. Here comes the truth.
Yeah, we're in after hours now, so Chris is great.
Well, I know these brewers can get a little sensitive, so.
Oh, they're so sensitive.
Yeah.
I'll add there was never a liking, even a suggestion of a liking at all.
No.
No. It's all about what is the beer we're trying to make. Anyway.
Yep.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
As far as eating restrictions goes, we kind of just loosely, we had the rule that if just don't modify your routine. If you have coffee in the morning and eat a bagel, an onion bagel every morning, like great, do that. But don't do it about an hour before you're tasting so that your palate is kind of going to be unencumbered by whatever you had previously consumed. And also just be respectful around with the people around you. So for the smokers, we basically just asked people to not smoke, right? Because we love them and we don't want them to smoke. But also because we just didn't want to have any kind of ancillary just detractors from what we were trying to do. So try to keep tasting or eating and drinking down to a minimum, at least an hour before, and definitely no smoking an hour before.
How about, any particular soaps or perfumes or deodorants?
Yeah, one of the biggest insults at the brewery was, "You smell nice." So we just tried to keep people from wearing perfumes, soaps, because that's obviously going to really inhibit your tastings. So we also kind of fought the long battle of getting non-scented hand soaps in our bathrooms for years. It took us some time to get unscented hand soaps.
Chris, so you're really nodding your head on that as if it was heroic.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
I think it occurred to me. I think Sensory may have been working on it before it occurred to me, and then it occurred to me one day after using the restroom right before Sensory. Washing my hands, and I came in, and everything was remarkably floral. But I, got in touch with our facilities manager, and I think it was pretty quick transition there on after. I mean, there's a number of things that you don't tend to think of. I remember, over the years in the past, I ride bikes a lot, and I've done some long distance events. And I remember coming into panel one morning after going out for like a really hard, 60-mile ride or something like that. And I came into panel and all the beers tasted different. And it turns out, Lindsay, there's some science behind that. When your body is under stress and, having gone through a strenuous, exercise period, for example, that influences your sensory perception. So,
no kidding. I thought we were going to get in the BO category.
Yeah. No.
Well, there was that too.
There's that too.
He just didn't know it.
No, it wasn't straight off the bike, but you know,
There was
you get the point.
Yeah.
I will add that, you know, if you go back far enough, we had there were, you know, crackers, sort of unsalted cracker palate cleansers in the tasting booths, and I think eventually we did away with those, you know, realizing that they probably caused more variation, or the potential for more variation than they did for like truly neutralizing the palate versus just water.
Yeah, I know Marilla Amato has pushed for, was it rice cakes, I think, for palate cleansers, which would be very
I'm not
good.
a big fan of any palate cleanser really, but I mean, it kind of depends if you're in like the judging kind of setting, like at GABF or WBC or something, and you taste 80 beers in a day. Like, I definitely liked to have something that kind of at least like changes up your palate, but that's the point, is it kind of does change things up. So when you're only tasting like 8 or so beers, we just didn't really see it as necessary. We also did research around that too. And a lot of the research that we did at New Belgium, we just never published, but we did some reseach around the
We
cracker.
won't tell.
Yeah, and we basically just saw that it didn't really influence the how quickly our panelists became fatigued. There wasn't a noted benefit to continuing with the cracker, so we just stopped.
Well, Josh says, what about the old smell the inside of the elbow trick? What do you think of that?
I'm pretty neutral on that. I think that it works. It works to just kind of like do a bit of a reset. As long as your elbow doesn't smell like flowers or something like that, then I think that it's totally fine. But it's just kind of a nice way of like neutralizing your kind of overall sensation.
So Paul says, Lindsay and Christian, thanks for the great job. We appreciate you taking time to do this evaluation. So thank you very much. I'm thankful for it too.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, we'll move on to the next one. Thank you, Jim. That was a good question. And so the next really popular question Edward has, and Edward asks, can the app be downloaded onto a laptop?
It is mobile only right now. Samplebox is mobile only right now. But that is not out of the realm of possibilities. DraughtLab runs on everything. It runs on mobile and desktops and tablets and all the things. You can certainly use it on a tablet, but for right now, not on a laptop.
So you'll let me know.
I'll let you know.
Cool. Edward, now I'll let you know. All right. Henry's got another question here. How are breweries added?
So breweries are added. They basically have an account. They have a Samplebox account, and they've basically said that they want to be running consumer research, trying to understand what are the attributes that drive liking in their products, and or they want to engage their consumers in a fun, meaningful way, and they set up their account. So breweries are added based on whether or not they want to be running research right now. There are plans in the future of like our very evil plan is to be able to have pretty much every brewery that's in there, so that you can kind of do that single player mode, do your evaluations. But for now, the breweries generally that you see in there are breweries that have done tastings, or we've like hosted events or something like that for now.
Well, actually, that raises a really good question. As we do our commercial calibrations, is there anything we can pass along? Like, we're going to be doing Fuller's tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Should we give them a heads up on the app?
Yeah, absolutely. All about it. Okay. I mean, one of the things that you can do, Doug, because you have an account, is you can show them their data and just say, like, FYI, we just tasted this with 50 people, 200 people, however many, and this is what they had to say about it. So, yeah, absolutely can relay that info.
Well, good. Thank you, Henry. Thank you for asking that question. Henry has another question. It looks like this one's for you, Lindsay. Again, Chris, I'm sorry. Is there a beer blueprint for the taster to know what the brewmaster intended? Well, you're not completely off the hook here. I may not like it, but is it in the larger target profile? I see the scoring note, but my sample may not be in the profile. So a beer blueprint for the taster to know what the brewmaster intended. He wanted it to be toasty.
Yeah.
But we don't know that.
Yeah. So the verified attributes, I think, is that blueprint. And I'm having a hard time maybe understanding the question, but in brands, the brewmaster or the professional will set what that target profile is, that those verified attributes, and that is what they intended. Now you'll see the verified attributes that you selected as a taster, but you won't be revealed all of the verified attributes. And that is so that you can kind of go back and do your tasting again and see what verified attributes are there. That being said, if the beer is actually not in profile, so, Chris may have had a good idea of what he wanted to make and he has verified attributes, but when no panelists or when no consumers have noted nuttiness, that's really interesting information for the brewer. So while you're not going to get scored based off of that, the brewer will still have really good information to understand that, okay, maybe I did intend on having nutty aroma in here, but nobody said nutty, and so maybe I missed the mark there. So that it kind of works flip side as well.
Yeah, I was showing now what do you call this dashboard that?
Yeah. So this is what the brewer sees on the back end. So this is where all the brands and events are scheduled. So the brands are there, and then you can see Fat Tire has verified attributes associated with it, and all those other beers right now don't have verified attributes associated with it. So what would be interesting for the brewer to see is if there was supposed to be nutty aroma, but nobody said it. That doesn't necessarily mean that the consumers are wrong. It just means that maybe they actually missed their mark. The brewer actually missed the mark.
Okay. Well, I will close that out. Thank you, Henry. Good question. All right. Americraft has the next one. Chris, you're up, buddy.
Finally.
How do you account for the differing water source when making Fat Tire or beers from the North Carolina brewery from the Colorado brewery? Do you adjust the water profile of the North Carolina brewery to match Colorado?
Short answer is yes. The longer answer is that we're very fortunate, and in terms of selecting a site for a second brewery, Asheville has really good water quality, really good water source quality wise, and so we're not too far off on some key attributes that we look at, and so we're able to adjust our water additions by looking at where we're starting in Asheville, where we're at in Fat Tire, and sort of calculate out where our additions land us and align both sites really, and that goes hand in hand with other pretty basic brewing practices like monitoring pHs across the brew house process and through fermentation. So that's how we ended up. We're pretty fortunate. We didn't have to manipulate the water too much or change it too much in Asheville. We were a pretty good starting point.
All right, good question. And Mark says, excellent webinar, you guys. Made stay at home informative and fun. I agree.
Oh, thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you.
Lindsay has a popular question. How do you account for the subjectivity in the description, like with taste for sweet, salty, etc.? Low versus high versus medium can have a high degree of subjectivity between people.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I mean, what Chris just mentioned too is there's a lot of variability within subjects. or between subjects and also within subjects. There's, one panelist could come into panel and have just different perception one day, and I taste differently than Chris, and that's partially what is so important about sensory analysis, is understanding that like one person's taste perception is not the end all be all. And so you do need to get data from a decent amount of people so that you understand what is kind of the consensus. Or on the flip side, you can have people that are really, really sensitive to sweetness and not so sensitive to sweetness. So you might in some ways see bimodal distributions. Now that doesn't mean that anybody is wrong. It just means that people are perceiving the beer differently. So one of the interesting things about sample locks is it will associate that hedonic score with the attributes that are selected. For example, if it will break down that if people really like it, they tend to say that it's very sweet, or if people dislike it, they tend to say it's not very sweet. So you can associate those drivers that cause that. So that might actually mean to the brewer that this beer might be a beer that is going to do really well for people who like sweetness, but not so well for people who don't like sweetness. So we're not looking for a direct agreement with all of our consumers. We're just looking at measuring the overall perception of consumers and how that influences what they like, so that we can make products that are better and more interesting.
Joseph asked this: is there a small section of population that notes nutty instead of vegetable?
I don't know about that specific case. I'm sure that's a thing, but I don't know about that exact specific like nutty vegetable disagreement. There are a lot of like cross-modal interactions that happen, meaning like people will perceive sweetness as being vanilla, or vanilla aroma as being sweet, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But generally, as far as confusions go, there are a lot of them. And my philosophy is, people might be tasting nutty and calling it earthy, or they might be tasting earthy and calling it nutty, or whatever. But me, I'm like, well, I mean, it's still meaningful for panelists to say what it is they're perceiving. Even if there isn't agreement, it's still really meaningful. Even if it's not correct, it's still interesting to know that there is a contingent that perceives nuttiness when they are given soil. So I think that's still interesting.
I mean, said another way, it sounds like, your experts aren't the ones that buy the beer.
Right.
The ones that are giving you feedback in this app are the ones that buy the beer. So what they think actually is the most important thing, whether they're right or not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It matters. And, it also helps breweries speak the same language as the consumers. So if consumers are saying that something is earthy and the breweries aren't saying those words, like, they better start using the word earthy, because that's what consumers know as whatever it is they're making. So
Michael says, enjoyed the seminar tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Our next one, here we go. I think this one's also for you, Lindsay. Why the detail focus on aroma but not flavor? I understand the difference in taste, but taste and flavor are different. This comes from Dev.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a common question. Flavor, if you think about flavor is the compilation of mouthfeel, taste, and aroma. It's the compilation of all of those things together. So when we use flavor in our normal language, we're often talking about the overall holistic perception, not just taste. Our language has kind of really been a bummer for us, because we often say this is something that tastes like this. And when we say taste like, when we use the preposition like, we're more often than not actually about to describe an aroma, not an actual taste. So a friend of mine, Allison Brown, who is in the chocolate industry, just recently suggested that we start saying, how does it flave, instead of how does it taste? Because that would be way more accurate to talk about what is the flavor perception, not what is the taste. The detailed focus on aroma, I talked about that orthonasal and retronasal perception, which is a big driver of overall flavor. Now, I've heard numbers thrown out like 80% of overall flavor is accounted for by aroma. I don't know where that number comes from, but basically we can agree that most of flavor is developed from your aroma sensation. So from that orthonasal and retronasal. Taste, again, just those 5 tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami. Those are the only tastes. It's unfortunate that our language doesn't really help us in that way. But flavor, compilation of aroma, taste, mouthfeel. Taste is just those 5 basic tastes. Aroma is orthonasal and retronasal. And then mouthfeel is their thing. So let's start asking each other, how does it flavor instead of how does it taste?
Well, and also from a consumer point of view, they don't really discriminate the two. As far as they're concerned, the flavor is it. So
yeah, which has been difficult to integrate into the app because we want it to be as consistent as possible with the science, but we understand that it can kind of be confusing. So
you've essentially made it consumer friendly, not necessarily Cicerone or judge friendly.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't quite say that because it is consistent with the flavor science. It is consistent with taste perception. So we call aroma and we call taste, and we don't overall, encompass it into flavor. We break it out as sense perception goes.
Well, good question, Dev. That took some serious answer. Joseph has our next popular question. One of the biggest issues I find with this app goal is that the quality of the beer being tasted, age and storage condition affects beer, keg versus bottle versus cans. What makes these variables valid in the app?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we've recently been, this app was really developed for taproom studies, for taproom engagement, so that the brewer can actually input, this is the batch I'm tasting, these are the tags that I have associated with it, so that they can kind of like follow that all the way through and get a good understanding of what it is they're tasting. But we know that there is variability in beer flavor. Eventually, the app will be developed in a way such that we could understand maybe like where people are tasting and what that's all about. Maybe like it could even flag potential problems for a brewery. Like we just got a strongly dislike in Milwaukee, and these are the attributes that were coming out, and notify a brewer. So those are all things that are just like pie in the sky ideas with where this could potentially go. It's still interesting to know that there are, if you get a 6-month-old beer and you do your evaluation, it's going to be seen as an outlier, especially as if breweries are really taking control of these consumer studies that they're running and being intentional about the events that they're putting out there. They have a pretty good idea of what it is they're asking their people to taste. If you're just going to a bar, of course, that kind of breaks down. So it'll still be good to know, but.
Lindsay, as I was setting up the event, didn't I see something about batches?
Yeah,
I realize that's not packaging, but aren't there some further granulation you can put on it?
Yes. So that is all dictated on the back end. Like, what batch are you tasting? What are you going to give your consumers to taste? Again, with the intent being this is a consumer research tool that breweries are going to use to get better insight to their beer flavor. So, having a good idea of what they're tasting is right now we're putting that kind of on the brewery. And, eventually as that single player mode kind of comes into play, there will be other options of being able to tag what it is that they're tasting.
Yeah, it might be fun to be able to put the date code in the package on.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Good question, Joseph. Gary has the next popular question. How do you OG a random beer into the app? OG a random beer into
just how do you input like a beer into the app? Yeah, at this point, there's really no single player mode. So you can't just say like, I'm drinking this beer and I want to evaluate it. Something that's coming and something will keep you updated on. But again, it's a consumer research tool that's intended for breweries to actually give beers to people to
Okay,
do
but
research.
Lindsay, I've got a group here with gourmet brewing, and we
Uh-huh.
have our section in it. Could we have a section for gourmet brewing? And if Gary says, "Hey, I want to do pick a beer," hey, a 1554,
Mhm.
we could throw that in there, and as a group, we could do it.
Absolutely, yeah, you could do that.
Okay,
You could do
okay, all right. So Gary, tell me what you want.
that. Yeah,
All
Doug has
right.
the power.
Yeah, for the moment. Next question. And by the way, we are at the bottom of the hour, and I know that we may be running long for you guys. We have 9 more questions. Can you hang in there for 9 more questions?
I'm good.
I'll hang.
All
Yeah.
right. Thank
Stretch
you.
out.
All right.
I'll be
Next
faster.
question, Lindsay. Looks like you're up on this one. This comes for Jim, and Jim says, "Is the app is it possible to see the results from the panel?"
Yes. So if you go into, I think we kind of showed it, but if you go into the tasting, and then you kind of click past the leaderboard, you can see what everybody else said. So all of those blue bars indicate the attributes that were selected by the rest of the panel. The red bars indicate what you selected as an individual consumer, and the little green check marks indicate those attributes that you selected that were verified by the brewer. So yes, you can find all that information right in the results page, and that's public for you.
All right. Christian, you're up on this one.
All right.
How did you get into the industry from homebrewing?
Oh, I homebrewed, and I feel like it's a pretty classic story. I worked at a pub in the city that I went to college in, and it was a brew pub, and I feel like I just bugged the head brewer long enough, and eventually started cleaning kegs after my bartending shifts, and one thing led to another. So I kind of worked for free for a little while, in a sense, and then one thing kind of led to another. So I mean, I think the moment I discovered I could get paid to make beer, the light bulb went on, so to speak. So yeah.
Well, good. In this environment, that's a good thing to know. Good question, Charles. Doug has the next question. Will I be able to use that join code in the future to demonstrate the capability of the app to others?
Doug, thank you for being an ambassador. Yeah, absolutely. That join code will still be available. Even when that event is closed, you'll be able to access it, and you can see the results.
And how, well, to follow on with his question, if they say, "Oh, I like this, help me do the first one," what's their next step? The brewery.
The brewery? Oh, the brewery can just reach out to us at info@sampleox.com, or me directly, Lindsay@DraughtLab.com. And I can set you guys up with an account. Right now, actually, during this whole pandemic thing, where SampleOx is free for breweries. So we just want to get people in there and using it and having it be like a way of just engaging with their consumers and continuing to work on product development when the tap room isn't available. So they can reach out to me and I'll get them set up.
Excellent. Doug has the next question. Why is light pink an option for color? It's extreme to the right of the scale. I haven't seen that either.
I mean, we put every color under the sun in there because who knows what breweries are going to do. I mean, New Belgium makes a pretty pink beer.
We're doing it.
It's pretty pink.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
I
put
know
it
I
all
had
in
a beet beer that was purple.
Yeah. We did a beet beer back in the day in New Belgium.
Yeah. It wasn't terribly good, but I won't say who brewed it.
Yes, yeah, man.
But I admire him for trying something with beets.
Yeah.
Annette asked, where do you go for the results?
Yeah, so Annette, if you go into just this little ribbon, you can see all of your old results. So you can see that you tasted Fat Tire and what you did and what everybody else said. So just that little ribbon. I want to keep saying it's blue. Actually, it is blue. So yeah, it's a blue ribbon. So you can see all of your previous results there.
Bill says, I got a brand new homebrew set up for volunteering as well to brew beer.
Awesome.
All right. Mike asks, and I believe this is for you also, Lindsay, unless you want to run with this one, Chris, but you might want to if you hear it. How does waxy translate to aroma?
Yeah, Chris.
No, I have my answer, but I'm gonna let Lindsay answer because I think she's better suited.
Yeah, well, I was actually just looking at this, and you can actually search up here for waxy, and waxy is actually in the lexicon.
Sure.
So you can select it. To me, waxy is that like caprylic acid thing.
Yeah.
You agree, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like soapy, fatty, like, animal hair.
Yep.
Yeah. That's how it translates.
I think you're right. That's where my mind went as well. I think you're absolutely right. And I think you're better suited to describe it, particularly because it's not a strong attribute for me in terms of threshold tolerance. So, yeah.
I had a beer that turned out that way, and I described it as soapy rather than waxy, because I would have said waxy was more like beeswax.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the kind of like conundrum. Like a lot of these chemical attributes that we train on have different sense perceptions for individuals. So like I'm a really big fan of just using analogy and knowing what kind of analogous terms are associated with chemical attributes. But in the craft brewing industry, it's unlike any industry in that we are really heavily focused on chemical names when describing products. That's seen as very bizarre from the rest of the food and beverage world. We work with a lot of other food and beverage companies, and it's seen as quite bizarre. I mean, there are certainly advantages to knowing specific chemical attributes, especially when you're doing nitty-gritty quality control and need to do troubleshooting to understand what's happening in your process. But when it comes to just describing the overall flavor of your profiles, like if you can describe with accuracy and in a repeatable fashion, like using analogous terms, I think that it's just as good as chemical names. Whew, that was a tangent.
Yeah, well, it was, but it does beg the question: if I was a brewery and beeswax was an important attribute,
yep.
Can we contact you to get it considered to be added?
Oh yeah. I'm more like the flavor map is a living document. I mean, Morton Mildgard was absolute. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. So the flavor map is a living document, and it's something that we are happy to modify and add to over time. And we actually already have. We've already come up with a second version of it as well. So, yeah, it's something that that basically just took Morton Mildgard's original paper that was produced in the 70s, and he basically brings this call to action to the brewing world, and says, we need a lexicon that is going to be changing with beer styles and is going to be changing with our language and sense perception as a community. That document wasn't touched until however long ago it was, 5 years ago. And then this was kind of our reaction to that call to action. So still keeping a lot of the flavors in there, but also adding to it as, our beers change and our lexicon changes and our language changes.
Yeah, I love that document. I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So I like that's why I liked why the app kind of flowed with it.
Yes. Yep.
Gary asks, is there a cost to the brewery to use the app?
Yes. Yeah, I have to eat, Gary. No. So yes, there is. We try to be really affordable as well. For those of you who are in the brewing industry, or food and beverage industry, that consumer research can cost $60,000-$70,000 per research question. So we were trying to make consumer research accessible and affordable and fun and engaging for consumers. So we keep the prices affordable. But yeah, like I mentioned earlier, during this whole pandemic, it's going to be free for breweries. So breweries are using it right now at no cost. But in the future, it is, yes, there is a fee.
But by that point, they'll know there's value or not. Be an easy decision, I suspect.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to charge for something that doesn't, bring some data and some insight into what breweries are trying to do. So yeah.
All right. Looks like 2 more questions and we will wrap up. Rudy asks, is the brewery able to adjust the verified attributes after the profile is uploaded to SampleOx?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. You can set the verified attributes immediately, and breweries and consumers can do their evaluations, but they can change it. Yeah, so if they change, usually they have a pretty good idea of what it's supposed to be like, but yeah, they're modifiable.
So Josh actually has our last question, but actually it had a lot of votes. So my apologies for it being the last question, Josh. I'm not sure why it didn't end up getting pushed to the top. I'm told it's supposed to do that. Let's see. This is for you, Lindsay. I'm pretty sure. Well, before I go, because I'm going to ask both of you and I want you to think about it. I'm sure it's a question you've been asked before, but what is your favorite New Belgium beer and why? So, Chris, you can be working on that one. You probably already know that one. So, Lindsay, is there functionality to see verified attributes from a brewery on a specified beer?
Yeah, and I like what Jason said too, just saying like I would really like to see what the brewery actually said. I mean, the short answer right now is no. The verified attributes aren't revealed unless you got them correct. You can go back and do an evaluation again. So you can kind of just be like, okay, well, a lot of people said that this was nutty. I wonder if it is nutty. And you can go back and do your evaluation and re-smell and select nutty and see if it's a verified attribute. So that's, again, we don't really reveal it so that you do kind of keep going back and want to engage in the competition. But it's certainly a good suggestion. And a lot of this is fluid and being developed because like from a lot of your comments. So I really appreciate your comments, Josh and Jason. So yeah, that's something that I literally just wrote it down. So that's something that I'll consider.
All right. Well, that is the end of our questions. So as we kind of wrap up, Christian, can you share with us your favorite New Belgium beer and why?
Yeah, and I'm going to give you an answer that I'm sure you've heard before, is that it's hard to pick one, right? I mean, I love Fat Tire. Triple is certainly near and dear, as is Abbey, which unfortunately we're not making anymore.
Whoa. What? You're not making Abbey anymore?
Nope. Abbey is, as wild as that might sound to longtime New Belgium fans, it's not in our portfolio anymore, at least not at this time. I'll say that. Wow. You know, and I'll certainly throw a nod out to Blue Paddle, also long gone. If anybody can see the artwork behind me, but I think, yeah, I mean, I think early on in the session, somebody mentioned Mighty Arrow, and that was probably the first pale ale that New Belgium made. And yeah, lots of great beers throughout the years. So hard to pick just one. There's a few for you.
Yeah.
Well, how about if season? Is there one in a, like for the summer season that's coming?
Yeah, I think summer-wise, I think it's a tough call now between, in the modern day, between Mountain Time and Mural. And I know Mountain Time's only available in Colorado and North Carolina, and I believe Utah now. but Mural is also worth checking out. I think we mentioned it earlier as having a slightly pinkish red hue. But now there are 2 other Mural flavors in the Mural variety pack, which are worth checking out. But if you're looking for just a beer that tastes like beer and drinks like beer, Mountain Time Lager, if you're in Colorado or North Carolina, or have a friend in those states and can get you some, is definitely worth checking out.
Alan says he's going to brew an Abbey clone.
Awesome.
Nice.
That was way back. I also made an Abbey clone.
Yeah, I
At
may
one
have
time.
to. Alan, you may have to share your recipe. I may have to do that one too, because that's one of my favorites. And I hate that I heard it live on our channel. So let's look at the polls right quick to give you a quick second to think, Lindsay, and we'll come back. So on all our polls, we ask, are you currently using apps like Untappd to evaluate beers? 45% of our group tonight said they do use Untappd, but 29% said no, but a sizable percentage said they used to, but not anymore, 25%. And I probably would fall into that category myself. It was really neat and novel at first, but it got old. The second one is, would you make the effort to use an app to provide feedback to your favorite local breweries about their beer? And almost 76% said yes. And an incentive would not be required. Below that, but substantially below, 15% said yes, but prizes for high scores would be of much more interest. So I think, people would love to do this just because they love the brewery, want to give good feedback.
Yeah.
So the next one I ask, and this is really for my gourmet brewing audience, really to size them up after seeing this. If you like the app after viewing today's webinar, would you consider using the app to evaluate beers before the gourmet brewing live streams to improve the fun and quality of our commercial calibrations? And 80% of the audience tonight said yes, they would. So I think if we got 80%, I'm not sure the other percentage matters.
That sounds good.
And our running total for the heuristic opinion of the New Belgium Fat Tire is 44% like moderately and 32% like very much. So Lindsay, you're up for your favorite New Belgium beer.
Yeah, it's gonna seem disingenuous, but I really do like Fat Tire. Not just because we're tasting it tonight, but the sample that I actually got was a little on the older side, but I was shocked to see that it was pretty much like almost out of date, because it tastes great to me. I mean, it tastes like still really malty, still has like its fresh attributes, nothing super crazy going out there. So it's a tried and true, trusty beer, and it's shelf stable and kind of a nice kind of go-to when I just want something that I know I can trust. So that's how I'm currently drinking. If I'm like going a little crazy, I do love Le Terroir. As far as like sour, dry hopped things, it's a palate destroyer, and it's totally on the opposite side of the spectrum. But currently, in my state of mind, I'm going back to the trusty ones. So Fat Tire is what I'm drinking.
All right. Well, my beer glass is empty. I bet everybody else's is empty. And I put there in the chat that our next live stream is with Lars Garshol, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. So if you click on the link, you can join up with, I hadn't looked at the total, but we were closing in on about 600 people for that event. So that will be a lot of fun. But tonight, all that matters is you guys, and I appreciate there's a lot of folks that have been on here almost 2 hours, guys. almost
you.
as long as you have.
Yeah.
But you all started 30 minutes before everybody else, and I appreciate that. But Lindsay, we've been talking for a little while, and this has been a lot of fun. And I think sounds like with 80% of our audience, we got a bunch of people here that love sample locks.
Great. Awesome. Well, let's keep
And Christian,
playing.
thank you so much for putting up with all my questions over the years, for homebrew questions and style questions. And if you don't mind, I may ask you some more in the future, or maybe you'll help us do some other webinars.
Yep, more than happy to oblige, Doug. Anytime. And just appreciate everybody on here. And I think it's just a testament to the fact how important beer is in our everyday lives all over the country. So thanks to everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
We got a lot of positive comments in the chat. So Lindsay, is there closing comments you'd like to make on apps and their value to breweries, especially right now in today's environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on it pretty well, but if you want to stay engaged in the conversation, we're starting to get a little bit more active on the social medias, so you can follow us at Sample Locks. You can also follow us at DraughtLab as well. There will be a lot more opportunities for broader kind of engagement like this. So just kind of keep your finger on the pulse with what we're doing. There's some pretty cool research that we're involved with, and I just appreciate your participation. And so thanks for being engaged.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I want to thank you, Lindsay. I want to thank you, Christian. I want to thank the audience for being here and joining us and having so much fun. Again, if you've got time to do it again tomorrow night, or actually tomorrow afternoon for me, it's kind of early, but for those of you in Europe, this will be a better time. So it's 3 p.m. Eastern. So I know even Pacific, that's going to be even earlier, but Lars told me he is in Norway, and we're already getting pretty late at 3 p.m. So we'll look forward to that. So meanwhile, everybody, please stay safe. Please stay healthy, and we really appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. See ya.
Cheers all. Bye.